Hey, I'm Andy Slade. I'm here today with Corbin from Oryx Chassis, and we're going to talk about trigger control. This is the continuation of our fundamental series, and trigger control is one of the most important things you can do in your fundamental process. If you're not pressing the trigger clean without disturbing your aim, everything else is for nothing. Okay, so you can have the perfect breathing, the perfect relaxation, sight alignment, sight picture, and natural point of aim, but if you do a poor job with trigger control, you lose it all. So the definition of trigger control is to manipulate the trigger without disturbing your aim, and that's easier said than done. I feel like the trigger control is a full body exercise because people tend to anticipate recoil by tensing up muscles right before they shoot, or maybe they relax as they're pressing the trigger and the rear bag falls out from under the gun as they're pressing the trigger and the shot will go high. So it's really important to make sure that we don't add or take away from anything in our position while we're pressing the trigger. We want to maintain that position and just press the trigger straight and clean to the rear. So with trigger control, you want to have the blade of the trigger centered on the first pad of your first digit on your trigger finger. So we don't want the trigger in the joint, and we don't want the trigger at the end, nice and centered on the pad. We want to try to have a 90-degree trigger finger, and some people that's really hard to achieve, so that's okay. What we really are looking for is just a nice flat surface where our finger is pressing flat and straight back to the rear. If you can imagine a piece of paper on the side of the trigger guard, and let's say for example this is a piece of paper and this is my trigger finger, I shouldn't draw lines high to low, and I shouldn't draw lines low to high. So if my hand placement's too low on the rifle, I'll pull down on the trigger, and if it's too high on the rifle, I'll pull up on the trigger. So we want to just press nice and straight to the rear, straight through that trigger into the buttstock. Okay, and then we'll get to this in follow through, but you want to just press that trigger straight to the rear, and then once the rifle goes off, you want to just keep it depressed to the rear and watch the round go down range. So good trigger control means that we're going to fire the rifle without disturbing our aim, and that we're going to have finger placement that's the same each time, so it's consistent.
What's the benefit of having like a lighter trigger pull?
Having a lighter trigger pull will allow you to break the trigger with less effort. That's kind of the obvious thing, right? So if it takes a lot of effort to break the trigger, we have to really have a consistent trigger press, and that muscle manipulation that it takes to break that trigger needs to be a lot more consistent and well refined, so that we're not moving the trigger one way or the other as we're pressing it to the rear. So if you can imagine like a real light trigger, it wouldn't matter if my finger was on the side of it. If I tried to press it back, it wouldn't really move the rifle a lot. But if it was really heavy and I didn't have good finger placement on the trigger, then it would probably take a lot more effort to press the trigger clean versus a light trigger. So the idea is that lighter triggers will allow you to get away with a little bit more, but still fundamentally sound shooters that are pressing the trigger straight to the rear without disturbing the aim are going to have better performance and more consistent performance over time.
Besides the weight of the trigger and being able to reduce the poundage it takes to pull the trigger, is there any other benefit to like an aftermarket trigger versus your factory one if you dial it down?
Yeah, so aftermarket triggers definitely have advantages over a lot of factory triggers. So some factory triggers will have what's called creep. So as you're pressing the trigger to the rear, it'll move before it goes off. Good aftermarket triggers will actually not have any travel before they break. So break meaning fire. So as we press that trigger, as soon as it moves at all, it goes off, which is a good thing because it allows us to, when we feel it move, we know that we fired the rifle. So it's a good upgrade, but the best upgrade that you can have is to practice the fundamentals of marksmanship, because you can actually shoot really well even with your factory trigger. But if you're looking to upgrade your rifle and you've already got, say, a good chassis that's going to give you more adjustability and the ability to run bipods in different places and things like that, then maybe a trigger would be a good upgrade for you after that.
What are some of the common issues that you see people having when they're manipulating their triggers?
So we see the main thing is anticipation of recoil. So it's not normal for an explosion to go off right in front of your face. And so what anticipation of recoil looks like is they would kind of flinch or slap the trigger as they tense up their muscles. We'll see that they close their eyes, actually is kind of a common thing. If a person's not used to shooting and they're brand new to shooting, they'll close their eyes right when they press the trigger, and they can move their aim as they're doing that, because they obviously can't see the reticle if their eyes are closed. So we want to make sure that you try to relax as much as possible. You think about it in your brain and just be okay with the fact that that rifle's getting ready to go off. It's okay. And we dry fire a lot, so it's perfectly fine to dry fire. Most modern rifles are going to have zero issues. You can, you know, consult your manufacturer if you're worried about it, but all modern hunting rifles that I know of are fine as long as they're center fire to dry fire, and that'll get you some practice in so that your brain isn't as worried about that round getting ready to go off.